Hey guys, Alex here. So it's now Tuesday, March 3rd. We recorded this episode on Thursday, February 27th. In between the 27th and the 3rd, so much has happened as a result of Joe Biden's resounding victory in South Carolina. Pete Buttigieg dropped out, Amy Klobuchar dropped out, Tom Steyer dropped out. So even though all those things happened, we were not able to account for them in this week's episode. When we come back after the break, we will make sure to include descriptions of what we think went down in South Carolina, of course, with Super Tuesday. But this episode, even though it's coming out a little bit late, does not account for what happened this Saturday. With that said, on with the episode. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the 5th episode of Catch 52, a politics podcast brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 47 weeks away from Inauguration Day 2021, and there's a lot we have to cover in this episode.
Yeah, holy cow. I mean, between everything that has happened regarding Nevada, with everything that is going on going into Super Tuesday, we've got South Carolina coming up on Saturday. It is going to be an absolutely insane weekend and week for us, which is exactly why we are taking the time to go on spring break.
Duquesne decided to very conveniently give us a week off right when we need the studio the most. So we're going to be off next week, but that's a separate topic. We're going to talk about what we're not going to be talking about until probably Sunday or Monday of 2 weeks from now, and that is Nevada, South Carolina, and every other state in the union, basically.
Yeah, it's going to be a little insane. So with that said, let's just get right into it. Nevada happened, the first in the West, the first where it's not just white people voting primary.
Yeah.
And to put it mildly, Bernie dominated.
Trounced, I believe, is a better word for that. He ended up with 46.8% of the delegate votes. In a, 7-way race, he came up almost 50%. Basically unheard of, especially in a race where Biden was leading just a few weeks ago.
And not only is Bernie's dominance in the polls really important, not only is his dominance of the overall vote very noteworthy, but his dominance of individual polling groups is absolutely absurd. Just to give a snapshot, right, of some of the groups that he won. He won ages 17 to 29, people who picked a candidate based on their issue preferences. He won independents. He won Hispanic and Latino voters. He won very liberal voters. He won, He won voters without a college degree. He won voters with a college degree. He won somewhat liberals. He won among whites. He won among ages 45 to 64.
He won everywhere. Basically, the only two places he didn't.
Oh, it's insane.
The only two places where a different candidate won by over 6 percentage points was ages 65 and older and black voters, both of whom came to vote for Joe Biden. Other than that, Bernie crushed it. There was no other candidate that really stood a chance in any form of diverse coalition. And I think in his victory speech, Bernie talked about how he was a unifier, and you really see it in this result. I mean,
if you look at the polling as far as the categories that Biden won, when we come to the black vote, Bernie won. So Biden wins 28%. Biden won 38% of the black vote. Bernie wins 28%. And then the next best is Warren with 11.
So even with the black voters who Biden has historically dominated in, Bernie's catching up, and that's also showing in South Carolina, which is coming up very shortly. And in South Carolina, I believe Biden started to pick up a bit more of a lead, but he's only again ahead by 10, 11 points in most polls.
And again, this comes back to the narrative. So right now Biden has an 11.8 point lead. That's a mouthful. Biden's leading by 12 points over Sanders. So Sanders is at 21 points right now. Sanders has rocketed past Steyer. which I believe you correctly predicted.
Yeah.
Last time we were here, Steyer has gone down from about 19 points to now he's holding steady at about 14.5%.
Yeah.
So definitely proving that at least as far as the Democratic primary goes, money can only get you so far, especially when Bernie Sanders is around.
Yep. Tom Steyer had been going very, very hard in South Carolina with all of his advertising. That was basically his strategy, was to win South Carolina and try to use that momentum to catapult him into Super Tuesday.
And on top of that, wasn't it weird to see him at the end of the debate stage that day?
It was very odd. Him, Mike Bloomberg, all of them. It's a weird sight to see so many billionaires on a stage among so many people who are talking about how billionaires shouldn't exist.
And also somebody who's still $130,000 in debt.
That's true. Yeah, Pete and Chaston together have about $130,000 of student debt that they haven't paid off. Meanwhile, everyone else on stage is a millionaire, as Pete will be very happy to say.
Absolutely. So let's go into Nevada.
Yeah.
Real quick, because I mean that's the caucus that we actually have the results for.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what this means for Bernie, as you alluded to earlier. Bernie as a unifying candidate, and what it means for perhaps a moderate strategy against him, because there was consistent disbelief among the pundits, especially the center left pundits, as the Nevada caucus results were coming in. Not only was there disbelief because the caucus results were actually coming in, but there was disbelief because of the margin by which Bernie won.
Yeah.
Now, he attributed this, I believe, to a Spanish language first campaign.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing is, I mean, if you remember our first episode, we talked about why moderate candidates are so great, but also why Bernie might be the exception to that rule. And I think right here you really see that Bernie polled well among people who consider themselves to be moderate. I think he was in second place behind Pete.
Some polls also have him winning conservative Democrats.
Yeah,
in Nevada.
Among moderates, he's second place among Joe Biden. Biden only has a 2% lead in Nevada. So even among moderate or conservative Democrats, Bernie almost won in Nevada. And I think
you mean a
2%
lead in South Carolina, or
no, in Nevada.
Oh,
so
okay.
Among Nevadan Democrats who consider themselves to be somewhat liberal or conservative, Bernie almost won that category also. So in terms of a candidate who can get high voter turnout and can get everyone behind his back, it might not be the moderate. It might be Bernie in this scenario.
So this is definitely something that's worth talking about, because in the aftermath of Nevada, it's clear that Bernie has an incredibly motivated voter. Bernie's base is I don't want to call it an anomaly, because I think it's fair to draw comparisons to the Trump base and how very solid it is.
Absolutely.
And how you have a subsection of voters that probably wouldn't vote if Bernie dropped out. Same with the Trump base. But in the aftermath of a lot of these primaries and caucuses, the center left moderate Democrat or pivotal voter Democrat talking point has not been Bernie is winning. Let's talk about the diverse coalition that Bernie is putting together. The talking point has basically been about electoral strategy, right? What kind of electoral strategy does a presidential campaign need to win in 2020? And two viewpoints have emerged. You've got one, which is the Bernie viewpoint, that if we can bring people to the polls, if you can establish, a diverse coalition. All right, the Democrats will always be a diverse coalition.
Yeah.
But if you can bring people to the polls who haven't been to the polls before, then that's how you beat Trump, because Trump has a very loyal base. We saw them in 2016. We didn't really see them in 2018.
Yeah.
And so if you just bring people out of the woodworks, that's how they're going to win.
And that's in comparison to the moderate viewpoint, whereas you need a candidate that even the progressives will vote for because they don't want Trump so badly. And that's what we were talking about in our first episode. But interestingly enough, it looks like in Nevada, at least, that the former viewpoint emerged victorious. So if you add Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar support all together, it's still not equal to Bernie Sanders, and that's not even counting the 10% that Elizabeth Warren won on either side.
That's I think the thing that nobody is accounting for, because you hear pundits, because in some of the polls, I think this was true in the actual numbers as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you add Biden, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, it's more. Is it more or less than Bernie? I think it's more.
In Nevada, it was less.
Okay, Nevada it's
Yeah.
less. Nationally, it's more.
I
And
believe
I think if you look at New
so,
Hampshire, it was more as well.
Yeah.
However, if you add Warren supporters, who are definitely the more progressive attitude,
Yeah.
to Bernie, the progressives have won every single time. 52% of Democrats identify as either very liberal or leaning liberal
Mhm.
or somewhat liberal. And this is proving itself to be true time and time again if you do the math in a more unbiased way.
And I mean, if you look at Bernie as the presidential candidate, looking at current Real Clear Politics polling averages, Sanders beats Trump and has at least 301 electoral votes. He wins Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Virginia, North Carolina, and it's a toss-up in Wisconsin and Florida. But I think it's impressive that Bernie's pulling ahead in Ohio, especially. I mean, that's something that Trump dominated in Ohio in 2016, and it's basically a not fully lost cause for the Democrats in 2020, but it's definitely not one of their focuses. They're focusing a lot more on Wisconsin and Michigan.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of the blue wall is gone. Right now you have sort of the blue fortresses. I definitely think it's a fair, and this is the case that Bernie has been making. He's making the case that he can bring some of these two-time Obama, one-time Trump voters back over to the Democrats, and he's arguing that he can really turn out the progressive vote, which I think is actually, I mean, if we just look at the numbers, right?
Yeah.
There was a substantial percentage of the population that voted for Jill Stein.
Yeah, it was, I think, 4 or 5%.
It's fair to say Bernie would get a majority of those voters.
Probably, yeah.
Especially since there were lots of anti-Hillary Clinton protest votes that happened in 2016.
Yeah, both
so if we take that into
Stein
consideration,
and Johnson.
For Stein and Johnson, absolutely. So if we take that into consideration, that Bernie is going to draw out of those, draw some of those voters, and we also take into consideration that 2016 was one of the lowest years for voter turnout in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So if we take that into consideration, it's easy to understand Bernie's argument. In my opinion, it is not fair to discount the moderate perspective that if there are people that Sanders does two things, and we should the first one is very simple. Sanders definitely scares certain moderate Republicans back into the arms of Trump.
Yeah.
And that is a weird argument that we can go into detail more on later, but I think the argument as to why not to support Sanders that is definitely more compelling is because of the impact that he has down ballot.
That is something. So the U.S. Senate right now is probably going to stay Republican in the next election, but there is a chance that with the right candidate that pulls out votes in certain moderate states, Maine and North Carolina and Colorado also, that those three states could give the Democrats, I think, a split Senate. I think it's right now a 53-47 Senate. So that could give Democrats a good leg up.
More
from where
concerning
they are now.
More concerning though, because at the end of the day, the Senate doesn't change. Each state gets 2 senators. So if a state's population is moving one way or the other, it's a statewide phenomenon.
Yeah.
What I think is of much more concern to the Democrats' long-term electoral strategy is the impact that Bernie Sanders is going to have in the state elections, because it's about to be a census year, which means gerrymandering is on the table once again.
Very much so. So there are a lot of pushes, especially with Eric Gardner in the NDRC, that to just completely, redo the way redistricting works. But the problem is that most of the people that are in favor of large-scale gerrymandering reform are typically Democrats, but if not, they're Republicans in heavily Democratic states like California.
Sure. And unfortunately, Republicans, I believe, despite the fact that popular vote, Hillary Clinton won by 2 million votes in 2016, Republicans control 2/3 of state senates.
Yes.
So I don't know how that works. Well, it's because I think that Republican strategists have a much more well thought out and much more well funded strategy than the Democrats have in a long time.
What we saw in 2016 was the result of, I think, 20 years now of Republican strategizing, starting with really Bill Clinton. After they lost to Bill Clinton in 1992, they put together this whole strategy. It started with Newt Gingrich becoming the speaker, and it just slowly built up to elect conservative judges by increasing conservative voter turnout in state elections, so that state judges would be appointed and they'd be brought up to federal level. So this whole thing has been a 20-year plan to get where we are right now, which is a very curious predicament for both parties, where the Democrats do not have a significant number of seats in most states, but Republicans are an increasingly dwindling coalition of voters.
Yes, which is why you hear a lot of maybe Democratic Party insiders, or you hear a lot of people like us saying, there is hope for the Democratic Party. As far as the popular vote goes, yes, there is hope for the Democratic Party. However, there is also a problem, and that problem is Republicans being able to gerrymander from the states and segment any kind of Democratic coalition that's coming together.
Yep. But the thing is, gerrymandering isn't just a Republican issue. So the Pennsylvania was gerrymandered for Republicans, as is, for example, Mississippi. So the thing to remember is gerrymandering isn't just a Republican thing. So states like Pennsylvania and also like Alabama and Mississippi, some southern states, are gerrymandered by Republicans. But then states like Maryland, especially if you look at their congressional districts, but also Massachusetts, Illinois, California, are gerrymandered for Democrats. So this is an issue that affects both sides. And I think that while the Democratic voter base is more willing to express the need for gerrymandering reform, it's not something that's a single party issue at all.
No, it's not a single party issue, and there are definitely at least a handful of California and New York Republicans, also some Republicans who are in Maryland who have expressed outrage over this, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But by and large, gerrymandering is a winning issue for Republicans. There's a handle. There's there's a lot of kind of sleazy tactics that I think it's fair to say that the Republican Party wins on, like voter suppression, real ID, and gerrymandering falls into that category. So but to get back to Bernie Sanders' impact on this, how do you think Bernie Sanders impacts down ballot Democrats all the way on the state level?
So I think in some states you're going to see a big difference, and in some states you're not. I think even in a semi-moderate state like Virginia, you wouldn't see that big of a difference. So the way Virginia works, and it's very similar to the way states like Colorado works, other quote-unquote purple states, is that there's not a large number of moderate voters. It's that half the state is very progressive and half the state's very moderate. Or is very conservative or semi-conservative. So you have, like, in Virginia, for example, like the D.C. area and then the rest of Virginia. You have the Denver-Boulder area of Colorado and then the rest of Colorado. Same thing goes for, like, New Mexico. States like that. You have I think a Bernie candidacy could honestly help those types of candidates, because what you'd see is that progressive voter base coming out and voting for that candidate. The problem comes in those moderate states, those Paul Davis, Kansas 2 districts,
yes,
where a Sanders presidency brings out those Trump voters, and that would be where or the concept of a Sanders presidency does that, and that's where you'd see possible Republican gains in the House alongside Democratic gains of the White House and the Senate, which would be a very interesting concept, but it could very well happen under a candidate like him.
Here's why I think you're wrong.
Okay.
There are of the I believe there were 42 House seats gained.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 42 House seats gained by Democrats, we said on our first episode that a majority of those were
Every single one
yes, were moderate seats.
Mm-hmm.
Those about 40 seats this election are at risk.
Yeah.
If the Democrats are running a progressive at the head of their party, and I mean that not in regardless of Bernie's brand. I want to make that abundantly clear. At the end of the day, would you agree that representatives are more representative of their districts than who those districts vote for president?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So here's the problem. You put a lot of these candidates in a very, very tight spot because they're Democrats. And we saw this happen with Trump in 2016. Of course, by now he's bully pulpited and collateralized a lot of his support, and the Republican Party has just turned into his personal fan club. But not so for Democrats. The Democrats are a much more ideologically driven party, and the Democrats have always been concerned about trying to appeal to the middle, regardless of what you say, of what a lot of people say to the contrary. At the end of the day, a lot of the gains that the party has made in the past few years have come from appealing to the middle in the face of right-wing, I don't know, I don't want to call it extremism, but in the face of a right-wing pull from Trump's base.
So that's not always the case, though. If you look at 2018, the reason they won was not one single unifying party message. It was we're going to run the pivotal candidate for this district.
But when you have a presidential candidate, when you're running in a presidential election year, whoever you nominate for president, it's like a law of physics. That person ends up being the voice of the party, regardless of what local candidates say. Can you imagine if Connor Lamb was forced to choose between endorsing Bernie Sanders as a Democrat and running for PA 17?
I don't know. I think that there's still room for Democrats to distance themselves from Sanders, especially because the odds that Sanders comes out as the nominee outright by getting a majority of delegates is only 1 in 3. Per 538, the 50% chance is that there's a contested convention right now. 50% chance that there's a contested convention.
It always goes down every time Sanders wins a caucus or a primary. The odds go to about 50% that Sanders is going to win outright, and then as we start to get away from that victory, the odds go back to a brokered convention.
Well,
I don't understand what changes in the meantime.
One big thing that just happened was, well, first off, South Carolina, Biden's starting to pull back back into a lead. But the other thing was there was the debate that happened a few days ago.
Well, that's true. And Bloomberg had a chance to get scripted for once.
So let's talk about that debate for a little bit. Bloomberg got scripted, and everyone else yelled at each other for about 3 hours.
Oh my gosh.
And that's basically what happened in the debate. There was very, very few moments of only one candidate talking.
And if there was ever one candidate talking, it was usually Elizabeth Warren trying to go at Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren has been going very, very attack dog recently. In a way that no other candidate really has this election, maybe hold for Kamala that 1 or 2 lines in the first debate. But even then,
Is Elizabeth Warren kamikazing her campaign in order to take down Bloomberg?
It's possible, because if you look at all of her speeches, she's been very, very, very accepting and promoting of Bernie. So she was recently, yes. So in Washington State, where I believe that's where she was during the Nevada caucuses. She was just campaigning for Super Tuesday states. She congratulated Bernie on winning, and the crowd cheered for him. At her party, the Democrats cheered for Bernie winning the Nevada primary. So I think that what Warren's starting to do, at least in part, is warm her voters up to Bernie, because I think it's pretty obvious at this point that if there's a progressive nominee, it's not going to be Elizabeth Warren, and if we go into a brokered convention, it's not going to be a progressive nominee. So honestly, I think what Elizabeth Warren's strategy right now is to take down one candidate with her, and I think the easiest target for her to do that is Michael Bloomberg.
Absolutely.
However, that did not always go over well with the South Carolina audience.
It didn't.
Surprisingly enough, she got booed, Pete got booed, Biden got booed.
Well, Pete had a rough debate.
Yeah, but a majority of the candidates got booed, including Warren attacking Mike Bloomberg on his sexual harassment allegations. So she had brought it up probably, it was like 3 minutes into this whole back and forth between them, but the audience started to boo her when she was pressing him further on these issues. And it was kind of a surprising thing to hear a Democratic audience boo allegations of sexual harassment, but it happened.
It did. Now, I mean, okay. I've heard talk that, because this is South Carolina, we need to take it with a grain of salt. I'm not so sure about that. I think these are, regardless of anything else, these are they're either party insiders or these are people who care a lot. I mean, getting into those debates, it's expensive. It's expensive,
and it's a lot of times it's raffles and stuff like that. So it's not an easy process, monetarily or time wise.
So I do think that I don't know. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made for the fact that Bloomberg has, has made, I don't know if I want to call them concessions, because then it, the idea of, releasing people from non-disclosure agreements is considered a concession. But Bloomberg has done a decent amount of what Warren has asked. And she's sort of going all in on it, saying, no, you have to do everything. Like this idea that, like, okay, that Bloomberg has to, put out his taxes. The TurboTax line was really dumb, and it showed, how out of touch he was, I think.
Yeah.
But also at the end of the day, Bloomberg is a very rich man who has a lot of business stuff going on. And even though he definitely knew he wanted to run for president before 10 weeks ago, I think that the idea that I think his excuse that he's working on it and that he'll have one out is pretty fair, because if he doesn't have one out, probably like a week or two after Super Tuesday, people are going to be baying for blood.
And it is interesting that he hasn't released it yet, and Super Tuesday's coming up, but it's important to remember that who Warren was playing for in that debate was not South Carolinians.
Yeah.
Bloomberg isn't on the ballot in South Carolina, but who she was playing for was the people that will be voting 3 days after that, namely the people in California, Texas, North Carolina, Virginia, Colorado, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, Arkansas, and Utah.
Well, I will say, if Elizabeth Warren wins California, that is massive for her.
Yeah. So now,
she maybe has a shot. I don't know how she's polling in California.
Well, let's go state by state and say who's winning. So I'll say the state, you say the candidate. Sound good?
Oh, am I guessing here?
No. Yeah, you can guess.
All right, let's do this. All right,
California, who's winning?
Bernie.
Yep, it's Bernie. Texas, who's winning?
Biden.
Nope, it's Bernie.
Oof.
North Carolina, who's winning?
Pete.
Nope, it's Bernie. Virginia, who's winning?
Bernie.
Yep, it's Bernie. Colorado, who's winning?
Bernie.
Minnesota, who's winning?
Klobuchar.
Yep. There's your one trick question. Oklahoma, who's winning?
Oh boy. Biden.
Bloomberg.
Oh.
Massachusetts.
Wait, Bloomberg is okay. It's Oklahoma, but still.
Massachusetts, who's winning?
I think Bernie's winning in Massachusetts.
Bernie.
As well.
Maine, who's winning?
Definitely Bernie.
Yep. Vermont, who's winning?
I'm not even going to answer that.
Yeah. And Arkansas, Bloomberg, in the one poll, Bloomberg's up by 1 point. But that shows you what type of Tuesday we might be seeing, and maybe that Warren's trying to get Bloomberg off of Bernie's tail a little bit.
That makes sense,
because
but Bloomberg's only winning in Arkansas and Oklahoma. That's kind of petty to say. You know what? We need to have Bernie win a clean sweep here.
Yeah, but
you can't have those states.
It's super interesting to see that. I mean, just reading down the list, it's Bernie, Klobuchar, Bernie, Bloomberg, Bernie. Like, that's what we're looking at Super Tuesday, and I think Warren realizes what's about to come in 3 days, and probably knows that she's not going to win this campaign, and I think at this point is going for Bernie's VP.
I don't know.
And the way she does that is by attacking other candidates for him.
That's a wild strategy.
And the thing is, she's also not super popular in her own state. I mean, hashtag primary Warren was trending this morning on Twitter.
Oh boy.
And I don't know, I can't speak to whether those are Massachusettsans saying that or, just Twitter saying that.
It's Twitter.
It's a call for something. And Twitter turning against a progressive candidate like this is not a common thing at all, considering Twitter basically got AOC elected.
I can't speak to that. What I can speak to is that I think that if Bernie wins the nomination, he's definitely going to have a person of color as his VP.
Probably, or a woman. It's not going to be.
Well, of
another
course,
white
it
man.
has to be one or the other. But
Yeah.
this is just my I'm betting on this because Bernie here's why I think it makes sense for Bernie to nominate nominate a person of color?
I guess, yeah. Run with
a person of color. I've said it a few times, and I'll say it again. I think Florida is lost to the Democrats for a generation, and this is a really, really unpopular talking point, but I'm gonna have to say it because I think it's true. Andrew Gillum ran in 2018.
Yeah, against
Rick Scott.
Rick Perry, same thing.
Yeah, Rick Perry. So he ran against Rick Scott for a Florida senator seat.
Florida senator because no, sorry. Rick Scott was running for the Senate.
For the Senate,
and Gillum was because Nelson was retiring.
Right.
And then Gillum was running for governor in his place.
Right.
That's what was happening.
So Andrew Gillum was he was billed as not the next Barack Obama, but he had all of the essentials. He was an incredible public speaker.
Yeah.
He was exciting people. He had the Cory Booker like smile vibe of hope, if you will. Maybe running on hope in Florida was a mistake, but
running on Medicare is a much better bet in Florida.
And I'm not this. There's a reason I'm saying this and not you, because this is really bad. I'm not saying that Latinx, that Hispanic voters, that all Latinx and Hispanic voters hate black people. That's not what I'm saying. But what happened in Florida is incredibly revealing. And what happened is there was a significantly lower Latinx and Hispanic turnout for Andrew Gillum.
That's interesting.
That was a thing that happened. And that was also something that has happened in Texas. And it is not often talked about because the Democratic Party has to appeal to Latino voters everywhere across the board. However, it is very, very important to note that, and this is I'm going to bring this back around to Bernie. So if Bernie, I think Bernie loses Florida outright, no contest, if he runs with a person of color.
Okay.
But I think that that's fine, because I think that the person of color needs to be from a blue wall state.
Okay.
Maybe from a state that Bernie could we can see Bernie maybe competing in like a Virginia. I can see Bernie competing in Arizona.
So I think Virginia, in the same way the Democrats shouldn't fight over Florida, the Democrats shouldn't fight too much over Virginia. Virginia's voted for, I think they voted for McCain in 2008, but ever since then they've been a solidly blue state.
Yeah.
For the first time in 75 years, the Democrats have complete control of Congress, fighting back from complete Republican control from Congress. So,
and this is the Virginia State House you're talking about.
Yes. So the Virginia House and the Virginia Senate both are democratically controlled. We have our blackface-wearing Democratic governor, and for the first time in 75 years, the Democrats do have control. That said, though, the lieutenant governor of Virginia is African American. So if you're looking to nominate someone that has a repertoire that's, a possible candidate from Virginia, he'd probably be your guy.
Yeah, that's up there. He's a little bit, definitely a little bit obscure.
Yeah, and he also, I believe, had a
option.
Sexual harassment allegation against
Perfect.
him right around the same time that the thing came out about Ralph Northam.
Ah, that's right. I remember, because it was like a all in quick succession.
Yep.
The other option, I think, is to have a person of color from, maybe one of the northern states, so Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, something like that. Because by doing that, Bernie is giving himself a chance to just sweep that blue wall and have more of a classic Democrat victory, minus Florida, because the demographics in Florida do not look good.
No, Florida has been trending red for years now, as the boomers move there, and I think that you're going to see that trending red until the younger generation becomes the plurality of the voters.
Also, let's not kid about this. Latinx voters are not a monolith.
No.
There's definitely a regardless of how small it is, there is an important conservative movement, not just among the black vote, but within the Latinx, within the Hispanic vote.
Well, largely that is the very devoutly Catholic Latinx population that's voting for abortion as their single issue.
Absolutely. But still, it's an important vote, and if that vote is going to get larger, perhaps as that community begins to accrue more wealth, become more educated, assimilate over generations into society, that vote will continue to grow. So for that reason, and then also because of snowbirds fleeing to Florida and then eventually establishing residency there, being able to vote there, Florida's demographics do not look good for Democrats. Mm-hmm. For that reason, I think it's fine that Bernie doesn't fight there. I mean, sure, you have to put up appearances, because any swing state that's like somewhat a swing state that Bernie doesn't try to fight in is going to draw comparisons to Hillary Clinton like 3 times over.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that sacrificing Florida in order to sweep the blue wall is a entirely successful strategy, and Bernie is a candidate who is perfectly suited to execute it.
Yeah, Bernie appealed very, very greatly to candidates in the Midwest who felt disillusioned and felt like they didn't fit the same system. The people that voted for Trump in 2016, those people that were like, hey, this isn't working out for me. And I think, well, we see great numbers about the economy, except these past 3 days. We've seen great numbers for the economy for the past 3 years of Trump's presidency. But what we haven't seen is that trickle down. We've seen great stock market yields, but we haven't seen a great increase in income.
Maybe it's because all of the money that might have been able to, been transferred through transfer mechanisms like taxes, we saw that, just get added to the deficit.
Yeah.
And then, but just to go back to Pennsylvania, if we look at RCP, Real Clear Politics averages right now, Sanders is the only Democrat right now who is beating Trump consistently in two big states that are being polled right now that are part of the blue wall, and that is Pennsylvania, where Sanders is beating Trump 49-46, and in Wisconsin, where Sanders is beating Trump 48-46.
Yeah, everywhere else there, it's a pretty close matchup. Biden and Pete typically do pretty okay there, but it's almost always a 1 point lead or a 1 point lead for Trump or a toss up. Sanders is really the only candidate that puts up any significant that defeats Trump by any significant margin,
which is wild. Is wild to say, because okay, we have this candidate who, let's throw out the odds for a second, has proven, not rather handily but has proven state by state that he has got and has been able to deliver on that strategy for the presidency. That said, to go back to the earlier point, what do you sacrifice down the ballot in order to do it? I think that I don't know if the Democrats lose the House if Sanders wins the presidency, but I think they definitely lose some seats.
It's a possibility. And if you want to elect, maybe if we go into a brokered convention and there's a candidate that you want to elect that's semi-moderate but from a Midwest and a person of color, I've said it before, I'll say it again, Tammy Duckworth would be a great presidential candidate. What would Trump attack her on? She's a disabled veteran mother. There's nothing he can attack her on. And I think it's because one thing we haven't talked about very much is what's going to happen with the general election debates. Hillary was winning by a ton in all of those states until won the debates and then until Comey released that report 4 days before the election. So what you might see is Sanders. I think Sanders is a very strong debater, but so is Trump. And I cannot guarantee that if Sanders is the nominee, Trump won't just flounce him in the debates as he did with Hillary. And I think one of his biggest advantages in debates is being able to attack people. That's what you saw with Rubio. That's what you saw with Bush. That's what you saw with Christie. I don't know what he'd attack Tammy Duckworth on, though.
Well, I don't know what I think that's fine. I like Tammy Duckworth as a vice presidential candidate.
Honestly. I definitely do. Yeah.
Except for she's Illinois, correct?
She is. So it's not really swinging anyone.
But she is a woman and a person of color, which which does check some important boxes. The only box it doesn't check is the one that's been important for like the last 100 years for vice president.
One important thing to remember also is that when choosing a vice president, if Sanders or Biden is your nominee, you need someone who can step in for them. Because Bernie's had a heart attack on the campaign trail.
And Biden, for lack of... is senile.
So, especially with Bernie, though, odds are he's not going to run for a second campaign if he even makes it past his first one.
Gosh, I hope not. I hope that Bernie doesn't run again.
No, I think that one thing that would definitely help his support is if he had a moderate running with him and said, I'm only running one term.
And Tammy Duckworth at least has a moderate brand.
Yeah, I mean it's the veteran brand that gets the moderate Republican vote. But the other thing with Bernie that we haven't talked about, circling back to this, is that Bernie polls not horribly among Republicans, and especially among moderate Republicans, because of his trustworthiness. That's something that every humongous on the Democratic stage will admit, that he's consistent and he's trustworthy.
Yes,
and that's something you can't say for Trump especially, but you can't say that for most of the Democratic candidates either.
I question if that's why the Republicans are always so quick to bring up his houses.
Possibly, yeah. So the thing with Bernie's houses is that as a member of Congress, you have to own two houses. Period. You have to own a house in the or at least in the state that you represent, and you should own something in DC to live, so you're not just like, unless you're Joe Biden and taking the Amtrak to work every day. I mean, you need a second house. And then that third house,
A vacation house, which lots of people have.
obviously
anyway.
not the best look for a senator who's running against the millionaires and is a millionaire. But also, if you look at the house, it's not huge, and it's in Vermont, so I don't think it's really that big. People say it's 3 mansions when it's a house, an apartment.
It's 3 shacks.
It's a cabin, and an apartment, and a house. So like, it's not really what it's all chalked up to be.
There's a lot of things that it's totally fair to attack Bernie on. Like I think the last debate really exposed him on a few things.
Yeah.
His metrics on how expensive Medicare for all is going to be, or how expensive public college for all is going to be, are massively. I mean, I'm sure that those are real studies, but it doesn't take an econ major to tell you that being able to manipulate economic studies is very easy depending on the kind of variables you use.
It's all framing, and it's really easy.
And then on top of that, I could keep going. Raising the minimum wage, there's a lot of questions there. His foreign policy, I like on face value, but then what does that mean? There's a couple of things that I think from a nonpartisan way you can dig into Bernie and say, all right, well, these are at least some questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we're going to have to do in a later episode, is go really in depth between Bernie and all of his policies. And if another front runner or tail chaser emerges, then seeing what they have to offer too, because right now it looks like kind of a Bernie runaway with no one else in his pursuit. And if you look at Super Tuesday, that's probably what we're going to be seeing. So
what do we do in the aftermath if let's say Bernie wins? There's how many states? It's 12,
something like that.
Let's say Bernie wins 10 out of 12 Super Tuesday states.
Yeah.
What's the reaction?
He gains a ton of delegates, and I think you're going to see an even more panicked reaction from the moderate side of the party. The thing is, what you see is, you see California, you see Texas, Virginia, Colorado. The people that are voting are not moderates. It's a lot of progressives. I mean, even in Texas, the people that are voting in the Democratic primary are the people that live in Austin and Dallas, and the people that are very progressive people, the people that supported Beto.
Yeah, the people who powered Beto's campaign are look, as much as I love the guy, Texas. It's a very different layout, because what you have is you have a progressive base, and you don't have a ton of moderates. You don't have a lot of centrist Democrats in a place like Texas. It's very polarized. Whereas in that blue wall, you do have a lot of in the Rust Belt, maybe along the the Mid-Atlantic. That's where the sort of the moderates of the Democratic Party are clustered.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different kind of campaign. It's a different style of candidate. And so I don't know if that's something we're going to. I think Super Tuesday may be. I guess we're saying that Super Tuesday may be a little bit premature, because the states are not necessarily representative of the states that matter and the states that we should care about, other than California from a delegate perspective.
But that said, Bernie will be gaining a lot of delegates, and it's going to be very hard to catch him. So with that said, it's now just about time for us to wrap up.
Our intro and outro music are by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda, produced by Elise Duda. Our signal monitors are James Walsh and Nicholas Delizio.
You can find a recording of this podcast on our YouTube channel, Catch52, as well as our Spotify, our SoundCloud, or any other major streaming services where you listen to your podcasts.
We welcome your comments, your feedback, and your suggestions. Just a reminder that we will not be with you next week, as we will be on spring break. But as soon as we come back, big things are going to happen. We've got some exciting guests that are going to start coming on the show, and we can't wait to share them with you.
And we're excited to hear from you and all your comments.
Have a good Friday and a great weekend.